Bill asked his roommate, "How was your blind date last night?" And he said, "Well, she had a great personality." And that's what we're going to be talking about this week, personality. Now, we're going to have 3 videos this week. Today, we're going to talk about what is personality. And then the following video, the second one, will be dealing with the psychodynamic approach to personality that's not really based on a lot of research, even this is a science-based class, but it has tremendous impact upon psychology, and psychiatry for that matter. And then third, we could talk about how you measure personality. And first, let's talk about what is personality. It's really how others see us. What are your traits? What type person are you? And in fact, those 2 words, traits and type, are the 2 ways in which we talk about personality. They're a certain type, or we say, well, they're sort of outgoing and friendly, and we talk about their traits. In fact, the word personality itself comes from the word mask, and we have a mask that represents a particular kind of personality. Now, let's talk about an interesting study that was done by Nisbet and his colleagues back in the 70s that talked about how people give reports about personality. And they would ask questions like this based on many, many traits. They're energetic, or they're relaxed, or it depends upon the situation. So they have a particular trait, or we say, it really depends on the situation that person is in. And they ask about their self, their best friend, their father, and about Walter Cronkite. In the 70s, he was a famous television broadcaster. And what they did was to say, how many times did people actually say it depends upon the situation, versus giving them one of these 2 trait names. And as you can see, they used the trait names more than they used the depends on the situation. But look at how they depict themselves. They had almost equaled depends on the situation versus giving it a trait name. So we can give trait names to people around us, whether it's a famous person or a close friend, but we give less trait names to our own personality. So we're not as good at coming up with trait names for ourselves as we are for other people. It's how we judge other people that's important. Now, there's several personality theories that we're going to look at. First, some early theories that deal with body. Then we'll talk about the psychodynamic theory, and we'll do that in the next video, Freudian theory and neo-Freudian theory. And then we'll talk about humanistic theories of personality and cognitive behavioral theories of personality, and then finally trait-based theories of personality, which are really research empirically based theories. Now, the psychodynamic theories and the humanistic theories are really clinical-based theories. They're based on lots of clinical observations, while the cognitive behavioral theories and the trait-based theories are research-based. But we're going to talk about all of them. First, some early theories that dealt with sort of things about the body. First, there was phrenology, and that's where people thought that personality was judged by bumps on the head, and they would examine your scalp, and obviously there's no support for this, but when I was in England, I bought this particular little model of a phrenology head with all the names of the various traits and where you would find them. If you found a bump there, it meant that particular trait was the way it was. I meant to bring it over and hold it in my hand, but I forgot it and left it in my office, but that's a picture of it. And so phrenology was an early theory, and then there was a theory by Sheldon, it's called somatology, which actually said that your body type determined your personality type. For example, if you were very thin, called an ectomorph, you were reserved and intellectual. And if you were big, then endomorph it was called, then you were assertive and bold. So the body type really determined the personality. Again, these have been dismissed totally as just simply false. So the first theory I want to talk about is humanistic theories. Carl Rogers is the one who's the prominent figure in humanistic theories, and I invite you to watch the video of Carl Rogers, an actual video of him talking about the way in which he deals with other people in the OLI material. It's person-centered. the goal is to reach self-actualization. So you do things when you're interacting with people to help that person reach self-actualization. We talked about that when we talked about motivation. Remember Maslow's need hierarchy? Well, you had safety needs and then being needs, but the top one, the ultimate need, was self-actualization. And Maslow was a humanistic psychologist interested in motivation and also interested in personality. So the goal is to reach self-actualizations, and those factors are primarily genuineness, like they drop all pretension, they're transparent, they're self-disclosing. And in therapy, using this theory of personality, what Rogers would do is try to help the person reach this state so that they could trust the person and self-disclose things about them. Acceptance is the second thing that you want to do in self-actualization, and that's sort of a unconditioned positive regard for others. You can accept, even though you know failings of other people, you can accept them and deal with them. And then the third is empathy, and that is to share the other's feelings. You listen and understand the other's feelings, and of course that leads to a very good sort of situation and context for therapy. So according to Rogers and Maslow, the core personality is one's self-concept, because you want to reach self-actualization in late life. Okay, the next sort of group of personality theories are the cognitive behavioral theories. And because B.F. Skinner was the ultimate behaviorist, and he believed simply that people have different personalities because they've experienced different reinforcement contingencies. It's totally based on how that person has interacted with their environment and has been reinforced. And because people have different reinforcement contingencies, they have different personalities, period. Later, cognitive behavioral therapists believed that you had to also have cognition in there. In other words, say, look at the relationship between behavior and thinking about that behavior. So the three factors in determining personality are your cognitions, what you think about, your behaviors, and the environment. And all three of those interact in a reciprocal way. In other words, cognition can affect behavior, behavior can affect cognition, the environment can affect cognition, cognition can affect the environment. These reciprocal relationships are the way in which personality happens. And the primary proponent of this was Albert Bandura, who is a social psychologist interested in personality. So we've looked at early body theories. We will look next time at psychodynamic theories. We looked at humanistic theories. We looked at cognitive behavioral theories. And finally, we're going to look at trait-based theories. Traits, what the trait theories say is we all have the same traits, but we differ on the level of each trait on a dimension. For example, one dimension might be introvert-extrovert, but we might be anywhere along that dimension of introversion-extroversion. And so that's what we have to determine, is where someone falls on that dimension. There are two major traits by Hans and Sybil Eysenck, a husband and wife team that looked at personality, and they used an empirical way, factor analysis, to look at personality. So they got all these words that could describe a personality, and then they put them through a factor analysis. They said, really, you can come up with two, maybe three, but two primary dimensions, and with those dimensions, you can account for all of those words that describe personality. That's called factor analysis. And it's a very important tool to sort of reduce down the variance among things to the few constructs that are necessary to account for the most variance. And that two dimensions were extroversion, introversion, and then neuroticism. And they claim that's sort of how stable is your personality, or is it unstable? And that these two dimensions really account for a lot of what they were looking at in understanding personality. Let's look at that theory a little bit closer. They say there were these two major dimensions, unstable and stable, neuroticism, and extroverted, introverted, which is, of course, the introversion-extroversion scale. And then on top of this, then, in these four quadrants, they could place all those words that describe personality. Like, for example, in the stable extrovert, things like responsive, sociable, and carefree. In the unstable extrovert, restless, excitable, impulsive. In the unstable introverted, anxious, reserved, rigid. And in the stable introverted, reliable, careful, passive. And so they're able to take these two dimensions and really account for a lot of variance. Now, other people have come up with more dimensions than this when they do the factor analyses, other personality theorists. And let's look at two more. First, Raymond Cattell, famous psychologist that used statistics to come up with what personality was. He had many, many what he calls surface traits of personality. He actually came up with 18,000 words to describe a person. And then he narrowed those down to just 23 traits using factor analysis, and call these 23 traits the source traits, the ones that you really need to account for the most variance. The most important trait theory, however, is the Big Five theory developed by Warren and Norman, and really developed empirically by Paul Costa and Robert McCrae. It's the most researched and the most accepted trait theory, which says that we have 5 major traits, and these 5 traits can account for the variability between people on personality. And these 5 traits are first openness, things like imagination, intelligence, they're curious, they're sensitive to music, sensitive to art, openness to experience. The second one was conscientious, words like they're a hard worker, they're reliable, they do the right thing, as opposed to they're disorganized and they are careless. But conscientiousness is the second mate of the Big Five. The third is extroversion, and we've been talking about that. They're sociable, they're expansive, they like interacting with people, as opposed to they're reserved, they're a loner, words that would be more introvert related. Remember, all these are dimensions. The fourth is agreeableness, things like they have a pleasant disposition, they're empathetic, they're friendly. And then the fifth is neuroticism, and that's things like nervous, emotional instability, moody, they're tense, as opposed to they are stable and they are calm. So these are the Big Five according to Norman, Costa, and McCrae. In the third video this week, we're going to talk about how you measure the Big Five. And if you want to remember them, it's always good to have a little mnemonic. And you can remember ocean, and that gives you what the Big Five traits are. Now, we've talked about we'll talk about psychodynamic theory, but today we talked about humanistic theory. And these two theories are based on clinical insight. And the theories are very important in determining the kind of therapy that you're going to use with a patient. And then based on research and based on data, we have the cognitive behavioral theorists and the trait theorists. Thank you.